Cut 2, it's from City Extra for the 24th of May, 1977.
So, Mr. John Mostyn has withdrawn his nomination to the board of the Australian Opera after accusations that he's been a troublemaker. He certainly made some trouble by charging the company of wasting money on some productions. He's also criticised the management's refusal to explain financial failures. Last night's annual general meeting was a stormy one. Mr. Mostyn has said he's happy not to renominate for the board because this leaves him free to press for an inquiry into mismanagement of the affairs of the opera company. He says he has further evidence on this. Mr. Mostyn's with me now. Good morning, Mr. Mostyn.
Good morning.
Have I quoted you correctly thus far?
Yes.
Would you please amplify?
Well, the water has been muddied, I think, somewhat by charges and countercharges over the last few days. The facts are that for some 15 months I've applied vigorous and forceful questioning of the opera company's management. It quite obviously was a critical period when the chairman had to announce that the company may not be able to survive through 1977, and yet before and after that announcement there were gross mismanagement, errors, mistakes, miscalculations, and simply huge losses of public funds. But my main issue is that a director must have the right, the duty, the responsibility to question the use of the funds, particularly if they're public funds. Now, Mr. Berg has sought to stifle that right. The major issue involved is that in subsidy funds, and the Australian Opera receives some $3.5 million per annum from federal resources only, the objective of the government in providing those funds is, as the Australia Council Act says, to broaden the base of the arts in the community. That is, to encourage and make it possible for more people to participate in the arts. And opera, of course, is one of the most exciting and entertaining of the art forms. But quite the reverse has happened in recent years. The base of opera in the community has narrowed to the point where only the wealthy can afford it. Now, if we took, say, just the one highly identifiable item that I attempted to discuss last night, the loss of $200,000 on Hero, a rough calculation would show that had that money not been lost, and it need not have been, it was pure mismanagement, as the report I read last night showed, that would have made the difference of around about $1 a seat for most of the opera company's performances last year. Add into that the hundreds of thousands of dollars in other incidents that I quoted in the press yesterday, and there would have been no need to have increased seat prices last year. And in fact, the company could have finished in surplus.
Is it annoying if I interrupt you there to talk some more about Hero, or would you rather finish the point that you would?
Go
All right, I guess we can come back to it anyway. It'll come out in the course of our conversation. Hero, the rock opera, Hero seems to me to be an interesting one to talk about, perhaps, as an example of what you feel has gone wrong. Now, can you tell us something about Hero first, and also have you with you the document that I think you quoted from yesterday, which suggests that it wasn't as well handled as it should have been?
It wasn't a question of not as well handled as it should have been, it was just not handled at all. Now, in the press yesterday, the retiring general manager of the opera company pretended that there was a 20-page report available, which, although, as he said, he didn't sign it, was perfectly adequate.
I'm sorry, I think I should just stop you there. I'm a little bit worried about getting involved in personalities. May we just say that he said that?
Yes.
It may well be that you're going to say something different. Could we leave it at that?
Okay.
And then would you please go on with this?
Right. And there is a 7-page report, in fact, the contents of which were so horrendous that the general manager was asked to report on the report. The report I have here, the one from which I read last night, is that of the executive producer of Hero. I'll repeat, if you'd like, some of the things that he says. In dealing with the script, according to the producer's contract, the working script was to be finalised by the 31st of January 1976. It appeared at 9 a.m. on the 12th of April, more than 10 weeks later. The rehearsals. During the 5 weeks that followed, rehearsals started late, often went on late into the evening. Cast members were unpunctual and sometimes failed to turn up at all. The company was slack throughout the rehearsal period and also during the run of the show. The producer made no attempt to instill discipline. This sort of delay became the norm, and rehearsals often concluded at 1 a.m. the following morning. Overtime costs increased accordingly. 1 week before the show opened, 2 of the trio girls quit the show, claiming that the producer was wasting time. This cost $1,000 to pay out the third girl's contract, and so on. I'll take you through to the final paragraph of the 7 pages. In conclusion, I would like to add that any production produced by a novice, designed by an architect, musically directed by a studio musician, presented in an unsuitable venue, overpriced and under-publicised, backed by a disinterested organisation and thrown into the arena at the most inopportune time, could hardly be expected to be a world-shattering success. Now, those are that's the report of the executive producer.
Mr. Mostyn, isn't that a confidential document? Aren't you breaking confidence in revealing data from that report?
No, I don't think it's a confidential document. It doesn't say that it's confidential. These are public funds involved. I've done my best for 18 months to attempt to cause the company to determine how this could possibly happen. No attempt has been made.
What did that opera lose, in fact?
$200,000.
Mm-hmm. I seem to remember last year, I think, that you were taking a different position on Hero. Wasn't it at the time that Donald Smith, who had had a break with the opera company, was saying the sort of things I think you're saying now, that there is some mismanagement, that things aren't carefully enough watched? And I seem to remember that you and Mr. Winther were defending the production of this because it broadened the base of opera. Isn't that so? I had a feeling it was on this programme.
That's correct.
Have you changed your mind?
Oh, I have. And remember, that's almost 12 months ago.
Was it?
And this report from which I've read was a report in May last year, 12 months ago. The evidence of mismanagement has simply been building during this period, and it had reached an absolutely critical point, as you well know, to the point where the company was said that it would not be able to survive beyond July 1977.
What happened, though? Were you aware of problems and didn't speak about them for some time, which presumably would have led you to defend the idea of producing Hero? And then you changed, or you became more concerned, or what's the sequence of events?
The idea of producing Hero, I have no argument with whatsoever. Experiment is justified and in fact necessary. It was simply that it was a financial disaster. Surely the opera company is an entrepreneurial organisation and it can have failures, but you can calculate the possibility of failure and budget for the loss. And in the case of Hero, it was budgeted to make a small loss, but it made, of course, an enormous loss. It was not until it was concluded, until this report was received in May, that the extent of the mismanagement was determinable. But since that time, a report in answer to how this happened, as Terry Craig has reported it, has not been received. Now, subsequently, there were further incidents. I've mentioned numbers of them. For instance, the $40,000 overrun in the production of Lakme, a 50% over budget. We became aware of that as a board only after it had happened. There was no continuing monitoring of costs. A $40,000 loss is absolutely enormous. That's much more money, for instance, than the independent theatre gets for a full 12 months operation. Now, surely, in these circumstances, the affairs of the company have to be better conducted.
How soon after you discovered that there was mismanagement of Hero, for example, did you say something about it, or did you find yourself in the awkward position of having to defend in public something that you disapproved of in private last year?
No, I commenced as soon as this report was received. I made the strongest request through the board of the General Manager to produce a report. And subsequently, on all other matters to which I've referred to date, I've most vigorously asked for answers and for the board to apply restraints and disciplines to ensure that these things couldn't happen. No such restraints or disciplines were imposed. Yes, I have defended the company, unquestionably, and in fact, not only have I defended it, I've gone to great pains to secure private funds for the company, and was in fact responsible for the negotiation of the $200,000 from the Utah Development Company for the company, and negotiated the federal government's matching arrangements. The last thing I want to do is hurt the company. What I want to do is try and strengthen it.
I don't suppose this week's events are doing it much good.
No, they would not be. However, if the appropriate authorities look to the matters to which I've drawn attention and take a more direct role in the scrutiny of the companies, then it will do it good because it will be tightened up.
I wonder if now you find yourself in a more sympathetic position with Donald Smith, who, I suppose about this time last year, was saying some of the things that you're saying now. And at the time, of course, you were on the other side of the fence from him.
Well, I became, initially, I was very anti-Donald Smith. There was no question of that, because he resigned on the eve of Carmen, and I felt that was just not on. However, the board had been informed that it was caprice of Donald Smith that caused him to not to perform, and we accepted that report. It wasn't until 2 or 3 months ago that I found that Donald, in fact, through the Melbourne season prior to his resignation and early on in the Sydney season, had been very ill indeed, and has doctor's certificates to that effect. He had diverticulitis, which is a most painful condition. He had an operation, was singing within 2 weeks of his operation, still with stitches. He was ill. I think that he was finally harassed to the point where he resigned in sheer frustration. And I've certainly done my best over the last couple of months to have him reinstated within the company. That has not happened, but he has signed a guest contract. He will be singing some Carmens within the next month or 6 weeks, and for those who have seen that production and were disappointed, go to it, because you'll hear one of the world's greatest tenors. He's contracted for next year to sing at least 20 performances. The operas which he'll be singing are unnamed as yet, and he's determined to rejoin the company as a permanent member. He deserves that right, and I hope that will happen.
Going back to the events of last year, it seems extraordinary that he had suffered that illness, and that wasn't apparently well known by the executive.
The executive would not necessarily be aware of the illness of
or the administration.
The administration must have been aware, because he has doctor's certificates, and if you cared to interview him, he'd bring them with him. No, the man was ill. Look, Don is a great tenor. Probably there are not more than 3 others of his vocal style in the world, and we're so fortunate to have him here. He is, however, highly temperamental, and I've never met a great artist that isn't. And as I've said time and time again at board meetings and to John Winter, excuse me, Franco Corelli would never have been heard had Rudolph Bing, at almost every performance, gone into the wings, put his arms around him and pushed him on. Now, Don doesn't require that. He's a very professional artist. But he does require to be treated with the dignity that a great artist deserves.
Well, as you say, we can expect some temperament among opera performers, perhaps. I suppose most people don't expect it among the board of directors of the opera company, and there has been a fair bit of washing of dirty linen, as it were, in public. What's the resolution of this situation?
Finally, the real resolution can only come from the subsidy authorities ensuring themselves through direct scrutiny that the affairs of the major performing or the major arts organisations are under strict and tight control. In the long term, that is, after the inquiry, after it's established that a closer scrutiny is required, what I would strongly suggest is the action that the British Council has adopted, and that is that the senior officer of the Australia Council attends at all board meetings and committee meetings, executive committee meetings. And that happens in Britain, in the Royal Opera and the Royal Ballet. Board meetings and critical committee meetings are attended by the senior officer of the British Council. Then the subsidy authority is aware of precisely what's going on. As I said at the meeting last night, to talk about making an annual report or simply submitting grant acquittal forms to the Australia Council merely virtually says if you've made a surplus, how much the surplus is, and if you've gone broke, how broke you've gone. It doesn't provide the detail that has led to that bottom line result, and I think that the subsidy authority should know. It's not unreasonable, Carolyn, to suggest this, because the ABC, for instance, as a statutory body, is subject to the scrutiny of the Auditor-General. Government departments are subject to the same scrutiny, and to the Public Accounts Committee. The Australia Council itself is subject to the Auditor-General and the Public Accounts Committee, and yet the organisations who receive enormous sums have no such scrutiny.
Are you aware of any move by the subsidy authority to take the course of action you suggest?
Yes, we did achieve one fairly major breakthrough some 6 months ago when, after the visit to Australia of Sir Klaus Moser from the Royal Opera, And when he told the board of the Australian Opera of what I've just told you, the British Council representation at meetings, I put to the Australia Council, who in turn put to the Opera Company Board that this should occur. So the present arrangement is that once every 3 months an officer from the Australia Council will attend an Australian Opera meeting. It's inadequate, but at least it's a start.
Mr. Mostyn, what's all this doing to the reputation of the Australian Opera Company overseas? We depend very largely on some very fine overseas artists coming here. Will they be inclined to think it's all a bit of a bungle and not be so keen to come anymore?
No, I don't think so. I mean, artists generally are concerned only with the artistic quality of the company with which they perform.
They're also concerned with the way it's administered, aren't they? I mean, I've heard some of them talk about it myself.
Well, let's face it, La Scala has had more scandals than enough, and it attracts the greatest artists alive. In many of the opera houses in the world, the artist insists, they take a bag before the performance and insist on cash in the bag for their fee before they perform. That there is a rumble at the Opera Company concerning management has no side effect on the artistic quality, nor would it in fact deter overseas artists.
Is some of this acrimony going to continue, do you think? You say you're going to press for an inquiry. You say you have more evidence of some mismanagement.
Yes.
So this word-slinging, as it were, in public is likely to continue?
No. What I propose now is to direct myself to the subsidy authorities, give them sufficient evidence to vindicate the suggestion that there should be an inquiry, and that inquiry undoubtedly will confirm just what I've said. And hopefully the end result will be, if not lower-priced opera tickets, at least a diminution in the increase in prices.
And you'll be going to the opera in future just as a patron?
That's correct.
You trained as an opera singer yourself, didn't you, once?
Well, more years ago than I'd like to recall.
But you're very fond of it?
Yes.
Mr. Mostyn, thanks for talking to us this morning. It's an interesting story. As you say, we're going to hear some more about it, for your point of view. Thank you.